Welcome. Settle in, find your most comfortable position, and allow the gentle current of history to carry you away. We are traveling a great distance tonight, not just through space but through time, back to a civilization often defined by its colossal, glittering monuments. Tonight, however, we will be looking past the Great Pyramids of Giza, beyond the gold of the Valley of the Kings and away from the fierce chariots of the New Kingdom pharaohs. We are going to the quiet corners, the simple mud brick homes, the dusty fields, and the complex, paper-filled offices of the Egyptian bureaucracy. We seek the rhythm of their lives, the steady, cyclical routine that sustained 3,000 years of history. We will be spending time with the farmer in the black silt of the Nile, listening to the gossip of the market, exploring the mysterious customs surrounding the journey to the afterlife, and finally, dipping into the dense, fascinating world of the administrators, the scribes, and the people whose entire lives were dictated by the power of the written word. Tonight, we examine what it was truly like to live and breathe in the shade of the colossal, yet oddly distant stone gods. Our journey begins, as all life in Egypt must, with the river itself. The endless grind of the Nile flood, what it was truly like to be an Egyptian farmer, the constant, back-breaking cycle of the seasons, the importance of the Nilometer, and the rigid system of taxation via grain. Find your comfortable space now, and let your awareness settle upon the deep, resonant rhythm of ancient Egypt. It is a world not of granite or gold, but of silt and sun, a narrow, vibrant strip of life pressed between the bleached expanse of the red land and the shimmering promise of the river. We are standing in the Kemet, the black land, and you are a fella, a farmer. Your life is an immediate, physical conversation with the earth. Your view is dominated by two colors, the hazy, relentless gold of the sky and the dense, dark, almost oily blackness of the earth beneath your feet. The home of mud and reed, your day begins and ends in a structure made of the very soil you cultivate, mud brick. Imagine the house you live in. It is simple, humble, yet perfectly suited to the brutal climate. It is built not from fired clay, which required scarce wood for fuel, but from the black mud of the Nile banks, mixed with straw, shaped into simple blocks, and left to bake slowly under the fierce sun. The walls are thick, insulating the interior from the day's searing heat. The layout is practical, perhaps a couple of small rooms, a flat roof used for sleeping during the oppressive summer nights, and a small walled courtyard where the daily grind of grinding grain takes place. There's no great expense here, no enduring stone. If you leave this house, it will eventually dissolve back into the earth, returning to the river from whence it came, a humble, temporary shelter for a temporary life. The air inside your home is still and cool, thick with the scent of stored grain, dried dust, and the fermenting scent of thick barley beer. The sounds of the morning are the lowing of the ox, the braying of a donkey, and the rhythmic, hollow thump-thump of your neighbor already pounding his morning bread. Your existence is defined entirely by the flood cycle, a 3-part annual calendar that is more immutable than any decree from the pharaoh. 1. Akhet, the season of water and rest, the inundation. The year begins paradoxically when the land disappears. Around July, the great annual miracle commences. The Nile, fed by torrential rains in distant Ethiopia, swells, darkens, and begins to rise. This is Akhet, the inundation. It is not a violent, destructive surge, but a slow, powerful, predictable expansion. The ancient Egyptians understood this process with elegant simplicity through the use of basin irrigation. They did not lift water from the river to the land. Instead, they built massive, interconnected mud and clay embankments that divided the entire floodplain into large, geometric basins. Imagine these basins now, stretching out to the desert edge. As the Nile rises, water is channeled through carefully maintained canals and sluice gates, filling these massive reservoirs. The water settles, remaining still for several weeks, gently soaking the parched earth. And most importantly, it deposits the black silt, the gift of fertility, rich in minerals, which is entirely responsible for the perpetual renewal of the black land. During this period, farming halts. The land is a shallow, vast lake, reflecting the immense sky. For you, the farmer, this is a forced, necessary period of rest from cultivation. However, the state demands labor. This is the traditional time for corvée, the forced public works. The pharaoh's overseers arrive, and you, along with your neighbors, are conscripted to work on maintaining the canals and repairing the essential embankments. If you are extremely unlucky, you might be marched further south or north to haul stone for a new temple or to build up the base of a pharaoh's tomb. This labor is the true, hidden tax of the peasant, a dedication of your body and time to the eternal state. The anxiety of the milometer, but even in this resting period, a low underlying anxiety persists, and it is directly linked to the nilometer. These stone measuring devices, typically housed in temple wells or built into riverside steps, were watched with more fervor than any royal announcement. A team of priests and scribes would record the measurements daily. Imagine the tension in the local village when the official reading was announced. A low Nile was a sentence of starvation. The silt would not be deposited widely enough, the land would remain dry and pale, and the yield would fail. A high Nile was a disaster of flooding. The turbulent waters would breach the careful embankments, wash away the precious deposited silt, and destroy your fragile mud brick home. The ideal flood was precise, high enough to cover the land, low enough to be managed. The entire economic structure of Egypt, from the pharaoh's wine cellars to your own beer ration, hung on these simple, daily water level marks. It was a yearly high-stakes negotiation with the gods. 2. Pere, the season of heavy labor, the growing. When the waters finally begin to recede around October, the land reveals itself again, slick and heavy. This marks the beginning of Pere, the growing season, and the return to continuous, intense labor. The ground is saturated, a thick, rich sludge. Since the water has done the primary irrigation, your immediate task is to break the surface and sow the seed before the sun bakes the mud hard. You rely on a simple, yet essential tool: the plow. This is not the complex, deep-cutting metal plow of later eras. The Egyptian plow is a heavy, single-share wooden frame, often merely tipped with copper or hardwood. It is pulled by a pair of oxen, strong, stubborn animals whose breath clouds the cool morning air. Your job is to guide the plow, using your weight and muscle to force the simple blade through the heavy, wet silt. The work is slow, methodical, and deeply exhausting. Each furrow is a struggle, demanding every ounce of your strength. Following the plow, you quickly scatter the emmer wheat and barley seeds. The seeds are simply trodden into the mud by sheep or goats, or sometimes just by your own bare feet, ensuring they settle firmly into the newly deposited black soil. But the work does not end with sowing. The river has only done part of the job. Now begins the constant battle to manage the water in the canals as the fields dry. This is the rhythmic life of the shaduf, a machine you know intimately. The shaduf is the quintessential sound of the Egyptian agricultural year. It is a long wooden pole, suspended by a crossbeam, with a heavy counterweight, often a clay ball, on one end and a bucket on the other. You stand by the canal, dipping the bucket into the lower water source, and using the counterweight to lift the full heavy bucket up to the higher irrigation ditch. Creak, splash, heave. Splash, the sound is mesmerizingly monotonous. You perform this action countless times a day, your muscles aching, your back protesting, simply to lift enough water to keep the thirsty roots of the grain alive. This simple mechanical advantage defined the pace of your existence for months, a perpetual motion machine fueled by human fatigue. 3. Shemu, the season of anxiety, the harvest. By March, the land is dry, golden, and ready. This is Shemu, the harvest season. The grain fields stretch out, heavy-headed and brittle, shimmering in the heat. This is the moment of communal, frenzied effort. You and your entire family, often alongside your neighbors, move through the fields. Use small, wooden hand sickles, the curved cutting edge lined with razor-sharp flint blades. The process is manual and backbreaking. You stoop low, gathering bunches of stalks and sawing through them with the sickle. The noise of the harvest is distinct. The soft, dry rattle of the wheat stalks, the rustle of the sheaves being bound, and the constant low chatter of the workers. Once cut, the grain is transported to the threshing floor, a hard, flat, packed earth surface. Here, oxen or donkeys are driven repeatedly over the grain stalks. Their constant trampling separates the wheat kernels from the inedible chaff. The rhythmic clop of their hooves on the hard earth, coupled with the soft, crushing sound of the stalks, is another signature sound of the season. Finally comes the winnowing. You use wooden scoops to toss the threshed grain high into the dry air. The lighter chaff is caught by the breeze and blown away, while the heavier, precious kernels fall back to the ground. This separation, performed under the intense blue sky, is the final decisive act of the agricultural cycle. The unblinking eye of the scribe. But the quiet celebration of a successful harvest is always brief, because the scribe arrives. He is clean, cloaked in fine linen, his hands unmarked by the toil of the field. He carries his tools, the palette of black and red ink, the rush pens, and the scroll of papyrus. He is the physical manifestation of the state's power and its unrelenting demand for order. The scribe's job is precise and cold. He calculates the tax burden. Using measurements established by the Nile flood level and prior yields, he verifies your harvest. The pharaoh, as the ultimate owner of all land and all its produce, takes his share first. This taxation, often 20% or more of the total yield, is taken in the form of grain, which is immediately transported to the massive state granaries. Imagine the silent dread of the farmer. After a year of relentless, aching labor, the final calculation leaves you with only what is necessary for your family survival and enough seed grain for the next parade. Any shortfall is instantly recorded as debt. This debt is not merely financial. It often means a longer period of corvée labor the next season. The pressure to meet the quota is immense, and failure can mean seeing your son or daughter conscripted into perpetual state service to pay down the family obligation. The scribe, sitting calmly on his stool, holds the power of your future in his meticulous count. Sustenance. The staples of survival. Despite this grueling cycle, life was sustained by remarkably simple staples. Your daily diet revolved around two things: bread and beer. The emmer bread you eat is not the soft, airy loaf we know today. Emmer wheat is tough and difficult to mill. You or your wife would spend hours grinding the kernels between two stones, a physically demanding task that often introduced tiny fragments of grit and stone dust into the flour. Imagine the texture of this bread: coarse, heavy, and gritty, constantly eroding the enamel of your teeth. The evidence of this constant dental abrasion is visible in almost every Egyptian skull ever recovered. It was the daily, unavoidable price of survival. The beer was less a recreational drink and more a nutritional necessity. It was a thick, unfiltered, cloudy liquid, more akin to a liquid porridge. Fermented from barley, it was highly caloric and safer to drink than plain water from a local ditch. Men, women, and children drank it daily. It was the energy source that powered the sheduf and sustained the long march. This cycle, the flu, the labor, the tax, the simple meal, and the return to the field, is the quiet, profound rhythm of ancient Egyptian existence. It is the steady, unrecorded life that allowed the great, gilded history of the pharaohs to unfold above it. We leave this world of silt and sweat now, to explore a life that was defined not by physical labor, but by the intense political demands of the divine crown. We turn our attention to the woman who dared to reshape the very image of Egyptian authority. Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who wasn't a man. We leave the humid mud and the relentless sun of the Nile fields for a moment, shifting our focus from the essential foundation of the kingdom to its sacred apex, the pharaoh. A figure who, to the ancient Egyptian mind, was not merely a king, but a living god, the embodiment of Horus on earth, and the maintainer of the fundamental cosmic order of truth, justice, and harmony. To be the pharaoh was to carry the weight of the universe, and it was a role that, by divine precedent and tradition, was meant exclusively for a man. Yet one of the most successful, prolific, and long-reigning rulers of the New Kingdom, the era of Egypt's greatest power and wealth, was a woman, Hatshepsut. Her name in the Egyptian tongue means foremost of noble ladies. This segment details the compelling story of her political climb, the subtle but profound propaganda she employed to legitimize her rule, and the strange, calculated efforts by her successors to erase her memory from the stone record of history. The daughter of Amun Hatshepsut was born into the 18th dynasty, a lineage of powerful rulers who had successfully expelled the foreign Hyksos, rulers and ushered in the golden age of the New Kingdom. She was the royal daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his principal wife, Queen Amos. Her early life was one of immense privilege, but also one steeped in the intense, formalized rituals of court. From her birth, she was trained in the protocols of the palace, surrounded by the powerful priests of Amun at Karnak, and groomed for a life of great influence, though perhaps not for the throne itself. Upon the death of her father, Thutmose I, Hatshepsut was married to her half-brother, Thutmose II. This practice of marrying within the immediate royal family was less about romance and more about maintaining the purity of the divine bloodline, ensuring that the successor to Horus was undeniably the child of Horus. Thutmose II was a relatively minor pharaoh, reigning for perhaps only 12 to 15 years, a period often characterized by small military expeditions and maintenance rather than grand vision. The marriage produced only a daughter, Neferure. Crucially, Thutmose II had a son with a secondary wife, a boy named Thutmose III. When Thutmose II died, the young Thutmose III was the designated heir. He was a child, perhaps only 2 or 3 years old. This pivotal moment set the stage for Hatshepsut's remarkable ascendance. The careful transition from queen to regent. Hatshepsut immediately assumed the traditional role of regent for her young stepson. This was a common and accepted position for powerful royal women in Egypt. She was the one who made the decisions, managed the treasury, and supervised the state religion until the male pharaoh came of age. For the first few years of Thutmose III's reign, inscriptions and statues depict this reality, Hatshepsut as the powerful queen and regent, standing alongside the boy king. The appearance of order, of Mat, was maintained, but Hatshepsut was not content with the temporary power of a regent. She possessed the fierce ambition and strategic mind that her ancestors, the great conquerors, had possessed. The kingdom was stable, the treasury was full, and she saw an opportunity to step fully into the role of divine ruler. The transition from regent to pharaoh was gradual, almost subtle, but profoundly revolutionary. It began with the quiet changing of her titles. She first adopted titles that hinted at her supreme authority, goddess wife of Amun and the lady of the two lands. Then, around the 7th year of the nominal reign of Thutmose III, Hatshepsut fully cast aside the queenly titles and formally crowned herself as pharaoh. This act was unprecedented. While women had wielded power, no woman had assumed the full, divine male authority of the double crown for so long and with such a clear declaration of divine right. The propaganda of the divine birth, the Egyptian political structure was built entirely upon religious legitimacy. For Hatshepsut to be a legitimate pharaoh, she had to satisfy the priests, the court, and the people that her rule was sanctioned by the gods, specifically the supreme state god Amun-Ra. This necessity gave birth to one of the most elaborate pieces of political propaganda in the ancient world, the myth of the divine birth. On the walls of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut commissioned a series of deeply detailed reliefs that offered her theological justification for the throne. The narrative, carved in calming geometric relief, showed that she was not merely the daughter of Thutmose I, but the direct physical offspring of Amun-Ra himself. The narrative unfolds like this. Amin's visit. The god Amin, in the guise of Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I, visits her mother, Queen Ahmose. Amun informs Ahmose that she will conceive a daughter, who will be the pharaoh. This scene validates her divine lineage. The creator gods. The creation god Khnum then sculpts Hatshepsut and her Ka, her life force or spiritual double, on his potter's wheel, ensuring her physical form is divinely crafted. The birth. The birth is attended by the various goddesses who assist with labor, confirming the successful arrival of the new divine ruler. The proclamation. Amun-Ra, in the presence of the gods, formally recognizes and proclaims Hatshepsut as his divine daughter, destined to wear the crown of Egypt. This elaborate myth was the bedrock of her reign. It neatly sidestepped the issue of her gender, asserting that her right to rule came not from her husband or father, but directly from the principal god of the state. The transformation and the beard. The visual and spiritual requirements of the Pharaonic office were intensely masculine. The pharaoh wore the hot headdress, the double crown, representing Upper and Lower Egypt, and most importantly, the false ceremonial beard. These were symbols of office, divorced from the actual gender of the wearer. Hatshepsut responded to this challenge with striking pragmatism. She began to commission statues and reliefs that depicted her in the full regalia of a male pharaoh. Imagine the transition. Early statues show her with the slender body of a woman, but with the male titles inscribed. Later, her likenesses become powerfully masculine, broad shoulders, flat chest, and always the straight braided ceremonial beard strapped firmly to her chin. She did this not to pretend to be a man, but to embody the pharaoh, an entity that was religiously and politically defined as male. She was sacrificing her physical self-identity to fulfill the requirements of Mat to ensure the continued, harmonious order of Egypt. To the ancient Egyptian mind, the symbolism was more important than the physical reality. She was performing the role the gods required. In her inscriptions, she employed a fascinating grammatical trick. She referred to herself using both male and female grammatical endings, but always with the powerful male titles. Lord of the Two Lands, King of Upper and Lower Egypt. She was a woman fulfilling a male role, and her careful use of language ensured her legitimacy was always ambiguous enough to be accepted. The architecture of eternity, Deir el-Bahari Hatshepsut's reign, which lasted over 2 decades, was one of profound peace and exceptional prosperity. Instead of engaging in the endless, costly wars of conquest that marked many of the other New Kingdom pharaohs, Hatshepsut focused on trade, building, and internal stability. Her most enduring and calming legacy is her mortuary temple, Djeser Djeseru, meaning Holy of Holies, built into the western cliffs at Deir el-Bahari, near the Valley of the Kings. This temple is a marvel of classical design and serenity, profoundly different from the massive, block-like temples of Karnak. It is a masterpiece of harmony, built not as a mound on the ground, but carved into the sheer rock face of the Theban hills. Imagine a vast open courtyard leading up 3 levels of terraces. Each terrace is accessed by a wide, gentle ramp, a deliberate contrast to the steep, imposing staircases found elsewhere. These ramps suggest a serene ascent, a gradual, meditative approach to the sacred space. The temple complex was not merely for her burial rites, but was dedicated to Amin, Anubis, and Hathor. Its colonnades were lined with calming reliefs, detailing the pivotal moments of her reign, including the divine birth myth and, most importantly, the expedition to the land of Punt. This monument, with its elegant proportions and integration into the natural landscape, speaks not of aggressive power but of enduring, graceful stability. It is an architecture designed to soothe the soul, a testament to a pharaoh who sought order and beauty over chaos and conquest. The Great Voyage to Punt, perhaps the most famous event of Hatshepsut's reign, and one of the most peacefully detailed narratives in ancient history, was the expedition to Punt. Punt was a legendary land, likely located somewhere along the coast of modern Eritrea or Sudan, famous for its exotic, highly valued commodities. Previous Egyptian expeditions had been small, dangerous military incursions. Hatshepsut organized a massive state-sponsored trade mission, a peaceful, large-scale operation designed to showcase Egypt's wealth and reach. Imagine the fleet of large, sturdy ships setting sail from the Red Sea coast. The journey itself was long, slow, and punctuated by the rhythm of the waves and the stars. The crews would have been acutely aware that they were traveling to the very edges of the known world, relying entirely on the precision of their navigation and the blessings of the Nile gods. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari meticulously record every step of this journey. The ships are shown arriving at Punt, the astonished welcome by the local chieftain and his noticeably corpulent wife, and the subsequent, highly successful bartering. What did they bring back? The cargo list is a feast for the senses, the material evidence of Egyptian luxury. Myrrh trees, perhaps the most prized item. These were carefully dug up, root ball and all, and transplanted into baskets for the journey back, destined for the temple gardens of Karnak. The sight of fully grown, foreign trees being brought back across the desert must have been astonishing. Incense, frankincense and myrrh resin, essential for temple rituals. The air in Punt would have been thick with the sweet, dry scent of this commodity. Ebony and ivory, dark, heavy wood and smooth, pale tusks, destined to be crafted into furniture and religious objects for the elite. Exotic animals, baboons, monkeys, dogs, and perhaps even giraffes. These living imports added to the exotic allure of the capital, Thebes. Gold, lapis lazuli, and copper alloys, raw materials to fuel the Egyptian economy. The success of the Punt expedition was a demonstration of power through prosperity, not violence. It was a massive injection of wealth and exotic goods into the Egyptian economy, solidifying Hatshepsut's image as a ruler who brought abundance and peace. The journey itself, recorded with such detail, is a calming narrative of organized trade and successful international relations. The quiet erasure, damnatio memoria. Hatshepsut ruled successfully for about 22 years. Then she simply vanished from the historical record. It is generally accepted that she died of natural causes, possibly from a slow-acting bone cancer, which has been indicated by modern analysis of her mummy. Upon her death, her stepson Thutmose III finally became the undisputed sole pharaoh. Thutmose III was already a brilliant military leader, having spent 2 decades serving as the head of the army while Hatshepsut managed the civil administration. He went on to become one of Egypt's greatest conquerors, securing a massive empire in the Levant. But about 20 years into his sole reign, Thutmose III began a systematic, deliberate campaign to erase Hatshepsut from history. This was not an act of immediate, jealous rage upon her death. The delay suggests a calculated political necessity. By the time Thutmose III began the destruction of her monuments and the chipping away of her image, his own son and heir was coming of age. The historical record, as it was understood in ancient Egypt, had to be impeccably clear. The line of succession was male. To allow the memory of Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh who declared herself divine, to persist was to set a dangerous, destabilizing precedent that another powerful queen might follow. Mat demanded male rule. The process of damnatio memoria, condemnation of memory, was painstaking. Imagine the stoneworkers, years after her death, being ordered to her great temple. They did not destroy the entire structure, which was sacred to Amen. Instead, they focused specifically on her image and name. Every relief that showed Hatshepsut wearing the crown was chiseled out. Every cartouche containing her name was methodically removed. Her great statues were pulled down and smashed, their fragments often buried in a pit near the temple. This was not vandalism. It was history editing on a monumental scale. The space where her name once was is now just a blank, ghostly shape on the stone. Ironically, this very attempt at erasure is why we know so much about her. Thutmose III did such a thorough job of hiding her fragments that archaeologists were later able to find and reassemble the evidence, piecing together the story of the woman who dared to wear the male crown. For over a century, the Egyptian king lists omitted her name, leaping directly from Thutmose II to Thutmose III. But the evidence of her successful, peaceful reign remains carved into the very stone of the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari. We transition now from the monumental, singular life of the pharaoh to the quieter, more complex beliefs that permeated the lives of all Egyptians, regardless of their status. Hatshepsut's concern was her own eternal life. The concern of every Egyptian was the safe passage of their soul. We move now into the realm of the great unknowns, the afterlife, the rituals and the deep, abiding mystery of the Egyptian preoccupation with death. Our focus shifts now from the fleeting political life on earth to the eternal, methodical process of the afterlife. The Egyptian preoccupation with death was not morbid. It was intensely practical. The afterlife was simply the next stage of existence, a mirror of life on earth, but only if the delicate, necessary rituals were successfully completed. Death was merely the curtain rising on the next, most critical act. The complexities of the Egyptian soul to the ancient Egyptians, a person was not simply a body and a spirit, but a combination of several interacting elements that needed to be kept in harmony after death to ensure eternity. The Khat, this was the physical body. It was vital to preserve it, which made mummification necessary so that the spiritual aspects would have a recognizable place to return. The Ka, the life force or spiritual double, sustained by offerings of food and drink. The Ka was born with the person and lived on in the tomb, which functioned as its permanent, eternal home. It needed a place to reside, the mummy or a sculpted statue of the deceased. The Ba, the personality, unique character, or mobility of the soul. Often depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba is the soul's passport. It could travel between the tomb, the entry to the afterlife, and the world of the living, allowing the deceased to visit their family and enjoy the familiar sights of the Nile Valley. The Erk, the unified, effective spirit. This was the glorious form achieved only when the Ka and Be successfully reunited in the afterlife, granting the deceased eternal power and peace in the presence of the gods. Mummification, the methodical preservation. The ritual of mummification, conducted by specialists known as embalmers, was a slow, detailed ritual lasting around 70 days, precisely matching the 70 days the star Sothis Sirius was absent from the night sky. The chief embalmer would often wear the mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, symbolizing the divine nature of the process. The goal was to preserve the Khat, the physical body, so the Ka could recognize it and find a permanent home. The most critical step was the dehydration of the body. The corpse was packed and covered in natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture found in dry riverbeds. which slowly drew all the moisture from the tissues. Imagine the body lying on the embalming slab, slowly changing texture over many weeks, turning hard and dark. The major internal organs, the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, were carefully removed, treated with aromatic oils and resins, and then placed in canopic jars, each dedicated to one of the 4 sons of Horus who protected the organs in the next life. The heart, however, was usually left inside. It was considered the seat of intelligence, emotion, memory, and the core of the soul, and it was essential for the judgment to come. Once fully dry, the body was anointed with precious oils, perfumes, and melted resins, preparing it for the ritual of wrapping. This was done with hundreds of yards of fine linen bandages, applied meticulously layer after layer, sometimes containing protective amulets, jewels, or personalized charms placed between the folds to protect the mummy on its journey. The final step of placing the mask and closing the sarcophagus was a solemn declaration that the cut was ready for its eternal duties. The Book of the Dead and the Final Judgment. The ultimate test came not on earth, but in the Hall of Two Truths, where the soul faced judgment. The individual needed guidance for this dangerous journey through the underworld. Do it. This guidance was provided by scrolls placed in the tomb, collectively known today as the Book of the Dead, properly titled the Book of Coming Forth by Day. These were not narrative books, but collections of specific spells, prayers, and powerful formulas to navigate the perils of the dead and bypass demonic forces. The serene recitation of these spells was meant to ease the soul's passage. The climax of the entire journey was the weighing of the heart. The deceased would stand before Osiris, Lord of the Dead, and a council of 42 divine judges. Their heart, the repository of their earthly actions, was placed on one side of a great scale, and on the other, the feather of Mat, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart was heavy with sin and lies, the scale would tip, and the heart would be immediately devoured by the monstrous Ammit. The Devourer, a terrifying beast with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, condemning the soul to the ultimate punishment, non-existence. If the heart was lighter than the feather, it meant the deceased had lived a life in accordance with Mat. The soul was welcomed into the presence of Osiris and achieved eternal paradise, becoming one with the sun god. Re in the field of reeds, a perfect mirror of the Nile Valley, where the harvest was always abundant, the waters flowed freely, and the toil of the Shaduf was easy. The rest of eternity was promised to those whose hearts were light. We now return from the halls of the afterlife to the bustling, dusty, organized world of administration. A world run not by soldiers, but by the quiet power of the scribe. The Egyptian civilization was arguably the most bureaucratic and paper-intensive of the ancient world. The vast temples, the massive building projects, the collection of grain taxes, none of it could have functioned without an immense, organized, and literate civil service. The life of the scribe, the chosen few, the scribe was one of the few people who could permanently escape the punishing agricultural cycle. It was a respected, sought-after, and often hereditary profession. A young man, usually from a privileged family, though some commoners did rise, would attend the House of Life, the temple school, often for many years. His training was arduous, focusing on the 2 main scripts: hieroglyphs, the formal, beautiful pictorial script, primarily used for religious inscriptions on temple walls, coffins, and tombs. It was slow and monumental. Hieratic, a simplified cursive form of hieroglyphs, used for everyday writing, letters, accounts, and legal documents. This was the working script of the government. The tools of the scribe were simple and elegant: a reed brush, his pen, a palette containing cakes of black ink, soot and red ink, ochre, and a jar of water to mix the ink. His canvas was papyrus, a material derived from the Nile reed, meticulously layered and pressed to form a smooth, resilient sheet. The act of unrolling a papyrus scroll, thick with administrative decisions, must have felt like handling the very fabric of the state. The structure of silent control. The pharaoh was at the top, but the kingdom was run by the vizier, the second most powerful man in the kingdom. The vizier was essentially the chief justice and prime minister, overseeing all departments. The treasury managed taxes, grain, livestock, gold, trade, and the immense stores of the state. Every incoming bushel of grain required a tally, a receipt, and an inventory update. The Public Works Department organized the corvée labor, Segment E, and oversaw all large-scale construction, temples, pyramids, canals. This required scheduling thousands of workers and ensuring they were fed, housed, and accounted for. The judicial system administered the local courts, where the scribe served as the prosecutor, defendant, and recorder all at once. Every dispute was meticulously logged. The scribes were the glue that held this structure together, embedded in every department, from the tax collector's field office to the pharaoh's personal chambers. Their quiet work, the meticulous calculation of bushels of barley, and the recording of land boundaries, ensured the orderly flow of resources from the Fella to the Pharaonic palace. Their silence and precision maintained Matt in the logistical sense. Everyday documents. The echoes of normal life, the majority of written papyri were not grand religious texts or royal decrees, but the mundane documents of daily life, the gentle, dry echoes of the ancient world. Imagine a scribe in a dusty Theban office. Legal disputes, recording the details of a disagreement over water rights or a stolen ox. The scribe listened, wrote down the accusations, and often delivered the verdict. Estate management, creating detailed inventories of a noble's property, from the number of geese in the courtyard to the count of copper tools in the workshop. These lists were the insurance and record of wealth. Personal letters, writing on behalf of an illiterate worker to his family, perhaps sending news of a new son or inquiring about the health of an aging mother. These documents show the depth of their family connections and daily concerns. Medical records, recording symptoms and prescriptions, demonstrating a surprisingly advanced, though often mystical, understanding of medicine. Even in their most personal moments, the Egyptians relied on the scribe to make their mark on the world. The act of writing itself was considered semi-divine, a gift from the god Thoth. To be a scribe was to be closer to the divine order, maintaining Mat not with a scepter or a spear, but with a reed and a pot of black ink. We now pull away from the ordered scroll and the silent tomb, and dive into the chaotic, vibrant heart of the Egyptian realm, the great cities of Thebes and Memphis. This is a world defined by density, color, and a rich tapestry of sounds and smells that would have assaulted the senses of any newcomer. The urban landscape, density and dust. Unlike the quiet villages of the Fella, the Egyptian city was a crowded, intensely urban space. The buildings, like the rural homes, were primarily constructed of mud brick, but here they were often built several stories high. Imagine the streets. They are narrow, winding, and unpaved, perpetually dusty in the dry season and a thick, sticky mud after a rare rain. These streets were primarily used for walking and the passage of donkeys, since wheeled traffic was rare and cumbersome. Above you, the upper floors of the houses often jut out slightly, almost meeting overhead, casting the street into deep, welcome shade. The sounds of the city are a constant, low-level roar, the hawking of vendors selling everything from dates to sandals, the rhythmic clatter of copper hammers from the artisan district, the sharp cry of the priests calling worshippers to the temple, and the constant braying of donkeys overloaded with goods. The market and the smell of trade. The center of the social and economic life was the market. Ancient Egypt did not use coin money for most of its history. The economy was based on barter and standard units of value, such as the deben, a standardized weight of copper or silver. Imagine walking through the marketplace, a chaotic, friendly cacophony of negotiation. A weaver trades a bolt of linen for 3 jars of beer. A carpenter trades a new stool for a sack of barley. Every transaction required negotiation and comparison against the standardized value. The smells of the city are intense and complex. The ubiquitous scent of stale beer and baking bread mixes with the sharp, acidic smell of fermenting wine and the dry, sweet fragrance of dates and figs. From the artisan quarters you catch the acrid, metallic tang of copper smelting and the heavy, musky odor of leather tanning. The most luxurious scents come from the perfume stalls. Kifi, a complex, sweet-smelling incense used in temples and homes, and precious unguent oils mixed with lotus and myrrh, designed to cool and scent the skin against the heat. However, the reality of city life also brought the smell of poor sanitation. Waste was often simply tossed into the narrow streets or collected by scavengers. The cleanliness of the river water was never guaranteed, relying on the constant movement of the current to flush the refuse away. The stark contrast between the heavenly perfumes of the elite and the harsh, pervasive odors of the common street defined the urban experience. Food and feasting. The taste of status. While the farmer lived on coarse bread and thick beer, the elite engaged in elaborate feasts. These social gatherings were designed to showcase wealth and reinforce social status. Imagine the scene of a nobleman's banquet. The guests are elaborately dressed in fine, pleated linen, their skin glowing with perfumed oils. Female guests wear beautiful temporary wax cones on their heads, infused with perfume. As the evening progresses and the heat rises, these cones slowly melt, releasing the sweet fragrance into the air around them. The food reflects their status. Wine, red and white wine, often from the Delta region, stored in sealed amphorae. The vintage and vineyard were carefully noted on the seal, indicating quality. Meat, roast beef, mutton, goat, and large fowl like geese and ducks. This rich, protein-heavy diet was a luxury denied to the majority. Delicacies, bowls piled high with fresh fruit grapes, pomegranates, and melons, a welcome relief from the constant bread and beer. Throughout the feast, musicians play harps, flutes, and percussion. Servants move through the crowd, offering not only food, but also lotus flowers, the lotus being a powerful symbol of regeneration and renewal. Its subtle fragrance adding to the calming sensory environment of the banquet hall, a temporary oasis from the dusty aromatic reality outside. We step away from the noise and smells of the city now, to explore the most stable and progressive structure in Egyptian society, the home and the remarkable rights afforded to the women within it. One of the most surprising and progressive aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization, especially when compared to its Mediterranean contemporaries like Greece and Rome, was the legal and economic status of its women. Within the structure of their society, women enjoyed remarkable independence and rights. Legal autonomy, property and contracts. In ancient Egypt, women were considered legal equals to men. This meant that regardless of her social status, a woman was entitled to own property. A woman could inherit, own, and manage her own real estate, livestock, and servants entirely independently of her father or husband. We have papyrus records showing women buying, selling, and bequeathing large tracts of land. Enter into legal contracts. A woman could sign marriage contracts, business agreements, and even loan documents in her own name. She did not require a male guarantor. Represent herself in court. If a legal dispute arose, a woman could initiate the case and represent herself before the local magistrates. Own her earnings. Any income she earned from her work, whether brewing beer, weaving cloth, or selling goods in the market, belonged to her alone. This legal autonomy meant that the Egyptian woman had a recognized, stable identity separate from her relationship with a man. Marriage and the economic contract. Marriage in Egypt was primarily a social and economic contract, not a religious ceremony. There were no priests or formal vows required by the state. It was essentially a mutual agreement to establish a household. The most important element was the marriage contract. This document meticulously laid out the financial obligations of the husband, particularly concerning the wife's security, the bride price or gift. The groom often gave the bride and her family gifts, ensuring her economic stability. The maintenance clause. Crucially, the contract stipulated the assets the wife brought into the marriage and what she would receive in the event of divorce. Divorce was common, permissible by either party, and did not carry a significant social stigma. If a woman divorced her husband, the contract ensured she received a substantial payment or portion of the communal assets, including compensation for the years she had invested in the marriage. This legal safety net provided Egyptian women with incredible leverage and security. Domestic life and the title, Mistress of the House. The most common and most respected title for a married woman of any class was Nebet per the Mistress of the House. This was not just a domestic title. It reflected her administrative control over the household economy. Imagine the wealthy home. The mistress of the house managed all domestic servants, oversaw the daily production of bread and beer, supervised the storage of the harvest, and directed the output of workshops, if the family owned a weaving or pottery business. Even in poor households, the woman was the anchor. She was responsible for the grinding of grain and the brewing of the daily beer, laborious, essential tasks that directly fueled the working bodies of the family. The health and financial solvency of the family rested squarely on her efficient management. The greatest societal honor a woman could attain was motherhood. The primary purpose of marriage was to produce children, and the goddess Hathor was widely worshipped as the patron of maternity and femininity. The simple, universal love of a mother for her child is beautifully documented in Egyptian literature, a soft counterpoint to the stern granite faces of the pharaohs. The stability of the family unit, cemented by these clear economic and legal protections, was the silent bedrock upon which the entire vast structure of the Egyptian state rested. From the strong foundation of the family, we now turn our attention to the physical health of those families, exploring their surprisingly advanced yet mystical approach to healing. In ancient Egypt, the line between medicine and magic was almost invisible. Healing was a holistic pursuit. The body was treated with practical skills honed through observation, while the spirit was addressed with incantations, spells, and appeals to the gods. Physicians and the House of Life. Egyptian physicians were highly specialized and well-respected professionals. In fact, Homer famously wrote that every Egyptian physician is a healer of men. They were often educated in the Per-Enk, the House of Life, which was also the Scribe school, meaning their training in literacy, anatomy, and ritual was deeply intertwined. We know of their knowledge primarily through the medical papyri, scrolls that function as ancient textbooks detailing symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments. The most famous is the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which is unique because it focuses on practical surgery and trauma. Imagine a physician examining a serious wound. The papyrus provides a logical sequence of investigation, examination, observation of the injury, its depth, and whether it pulses. Diagnosis, a logical determination of the injury, for example, a broken collarbone. Prognosis, a three-part judgment, an ailment I will treat. Good prognosis, an ailment with which I will contend. Uncertain prognosis, an ailment not to be treated. Fatal prognosis. This logical, clinical approach, divorced from magic, showcases a deep, functional understanding of human anatomy, likely gained through the process of mummification. They were skilled in setting fractures, treating wounds with honey, a natural antiseptic, and recognizing the connection between pulse and injury severity. The pharmacopoeia, herbal remedies and practical cures. Beyond surgery, Egyptian medicine relied heavily on a sophisticated pharmacopoeia, vast library of natural remedies derived from plants, minerals, and animal products. Imagine the physician's workshop. The air is thick with the scent of ground herbs and resins. Their remedies included castor oil, used as a strong purgative for internal ailments; opium, used along with other sedatives to relieve pain; mint and thyme, used for digestive issues and bad breath; animal fats, mixed with herbs to create salves and ointments for skin infections and burns. They also recognized the importance of hygiene. Cleanliness was linked to piety, and priests often shaved all body hair and washed multiple times a day. Their understanding of dentistry, however, lagged behind. Tooth decay was endemic due to the coarse, gritty nature of their bread. Segment 1. And dental problems were often treated with painful extractions or simple magic spells, as restorative dentistry was beyond their technological reach. The necessary power of magic. When the practical skills of the physician failed, or when the cause of illness was invisible, such as a fever, a spirit possession, or a snakebite magic took over, the illness was often seen as the result of a curse, a wandering evil spirit, or an imbalance of divine favor. The heka, the Egyptian word for magic, also meaning authoritative utterance, was employed through amulets, small protective charms worn on the body, the Eye of Horus, wajet, for protection, the ankh for life, or the scarab beetle for regeneration. These were the first line of spiritual defense. Incantations, spells written on papyrus, often dissolved into a liquid and drunk by the patient, or recited aloud to force the evil spirit out of the body. The power lay in the precise, authoritative recitation of the sacred words. Divine intervention. Appeals to healing deities like Sekhmet, goddess of plague, who could also cure it, and Thoth, god of knowledge and wisdom. The same individual could act as both surgeon and magician, showing that in the Egyptian mind, the spiritual and physical worlds were not separate entities, but two facets of the same struggle to maintain health and mat. From the intimate struggles for health, we now turn to the vast outward struggle to maintain the empire, exploring the disciplined, organized power of the Egyptian military. While Egypt's self-image was one of stability and peace, its long reign was secured by a highly effective professional military machine. This force was the instrument of the pharaoh's will, securing trade routes, suppressing rebellions, and conquering territory, particularly during the explosive growth of the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BCE. The organization, conscripts and professionals. The army was structured in two main branches. The conscripted infantry. This was the foundation of the force, largely drawn from the corvée labor system, segment E. These men, armed with simple spears and shields, formed the bulk of the massed formations, particularly in the Old and Middle Kingdoms. The professional corps, the truly fearsome element, was the career soldiers, often organized into divisions named after major gods, Amun, Ra, Ptah, Sutek. These were highly trained, well-disciplined men who formed the elite infantry and crewed the technological marvel of the age. The chariot, the Bronze Age tank, the chariot corps. The chariot transformed Egyptian warfare and became the symbol of New Kingdom power. Adopted from the Hyksos invaders, the Egyptians perfected its design. Imagine the chariot. It was a light two-wheeled platform designed for speed and maneuverability. It was pulled by two horses. The crew consisted of two men. The driver, focused solely on guiding the horses, often wearing a leather breastplate. The archer-fighter, the nobleman or elite soldier, armed with a powerful composite bow. This bow, made of layers of wood, sinew, and horn, had far greater range and force than a simple wooden bow, allowing the chariots to deliver devastating waves of arrows into the enemy lines before closing for a charge. Chariots were the ultimate shock weapon. They were used to break the enemy formation, disrupting their line, and allowing the heavy infantry to finish the job. The speed and dust of a charging chariot corps, led by the pharaoh himself, was designed to inspire terror and immediately break the enemy's will to fight. Weaponry and tactics. Egyptian forces relied on a combination of close quarters and ranged weapons. Khopesh, the signature Egyptian weapon, a bronze sickle sword. Axes. Simple battle axes with bronze heads, effective in hand-to-hand combat. Spears and shields, the standard equipment for the common soldier. Shields were typically made of wood covered with hide. Tactically, the Egyptian army was renowned for its logistics and siege warfare. They were experts at building temporary camps, maintaining supply lines over vast desert distances, and employing siege ladders and towers when facing fortified cities in the Levant. A core motivation for military action was securing access to resources, particularly gold from Nubia and timber from Lebanon. These foreign campaigns were meticulously documented in temple inscriptions, serving as both historical record and propaganda designed to show the pharaoh successfully defeating chaos and maintaining mat across the known world. The military, therefore, was not just a tool of defense. It was the engine of the empire's wealth, ensuring the gold, cedar, and incense that sustained the palaces and temples continued to flow back to the Nile Valley. We have now traveled through the full cycle of Egyptian life, from the dirt of the field to the power of the palace, from the magic of the healer to the might of the army. We have seen the incredible detail, the quiet labor, and the deep, abiding order that defined this civilization. We have now spent time with the farmer, the queen, the embalmer, the scribe, and the soldier. What emerges from this journey beyond the monumental stones is a profoundly detailed and deeply human picture of ancient Egypt. It was a civilization that prized order above all else. This order, or mat-at, was visible not just in the colossal temples, but in the meticulous calculation of the grain tax, the standardized weight of the copper debin, the precise 70-day window for embalming, and the legal parity of women in the eyes of the law. The rhythm of the Nile, the predictability of the flood, created a society that valued stability, patience, and the meticulous keeping of records. As we gently fade from the noise of the market and the quiet, dry rattle of the papyrus scrolls, let us carry with us the understanding that the true longevity of ancient Egypt lay not in the immortality of its kings, but in the enduring, patient labor of its people, all living their lives within the perfect, unchanging order of the Black Land. Thank you for joining us on this journey.